Okay. Hi, hello, good morning. I'm Dr. Liberty Galvin. I'm the extension weed scientist here at Oklahoma State. If you didn't know, I'm the only weed scientist here at Oklahoma State. So the first line of my job description says small grains, but I dabble a little bit all over the place. This morning, I had the privilege of starting off the Winter Crops School, but the real privilege was being asked to facilitate the weed science section. So I'm happy to be here. I'm going to kick us off with a cultural weed control piece. I'll share a little bit of preliminary data. Then I'm going to hand the mic off to my colleague, Michael Flessner. He came over from Virginia Tech. And then Dr. Michael Flessner. And then Dr. Steve Lee will finish up the session talking about drone applications. Many of you have to listen to me talk at different times during the year. So I invited 2 other people for the weed science section. So you'll only get a small dose of me this morning versus other times. So I want to talk about what is cultural weed control? And, maybe you could guess it has something to do with competition. I want to talk about competition, and then I'm going to talk about competition and how it is measurable. And then a little bit of the current research. So the GROW network, that's the Getting Rid of Weeds network. This is a pretty popular conglomerate of weed scientists that contribute to this particular publication. Cultural weed management, it's practices that farmers can do to help the crop be more competitive. Some of the nuances of this involve fertility, weed-free soil, crop rotation, timely scouting, cover cropping, early detection. These are not the pieces I want to focus on today. What I really want to focus on is cultural weed management is the practice of making the crop more competitive. Okay, so what does that actually mean? I got some folks in trouble recently. Not on purpose, but I said, hey, did you know that competition is measurable? You can measure a competitive plant or a competitive crop. And as a weed scientist, we do a lot of competition measurements because weeds are more competitive than crops, right? So the proposal here is that we're going to flip it around and we're going to talk about how do we make crops more competitive than their weedy counterparts. So this is from the Integrated Weed Management Guide from the Mid-Atlantic. They grow wheat over there. I'm going to talk a lot about wheat, a little bit about Italian ryegrass today. But you guys know Charlie. Charlie's a really good weed scientist over in North Carolina, and he wrote this section about cultural weed control. A little side note, for the PowerPoint, I have 2 presentations today. All of these references that I put on the screen, I have a link to them. So if anybody really wants to read more about anything that you see in my PowerPoints, I'm happy to send you the PowerPoint. It's got links to all the PDFs. But cultural weed control involves, crop rotation, some of these agronomy things. But canopy closure, okay? Seeding rate and row spacing. We're talking about canopy closure. Dr. Amanda Silva, did a really interesting seeding rate study recently with wheat. And I cannot remember exactly the range, but I think it was 350,000 seeds up to 1 million seeds per acre. And there was no yield differences in wheat. And the plant starts to, it starts to tiller a little bit differently. It starts to produce shoots a little bit differently, but there was no yield differences in those seeding rates. And to me, as a weed scientist, that's a massive opportunity. If you're already planting, okay, and I want to caveat all of this. I understand that economics play a massive role in how we farm. Farming is a business. So everything that we're presenting today is theoretical. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about, when wheat is $4 a bushel, are we paying for our herbicide applications actually? So, keep all of this with a grain of salt. But to achieve canopy closure, that gives the crop a massive advantage because it reduces the weed's ability to capture light. If plants can't photosynthesize, they can't make carbohydrates, they can't survive. A weed, an annual weed especially, its whole life history strategy is to produce as many freaking seeds as possible for the next season. So if we're establishing a very robust crop and it shades out the soil surface, those weed seeds are maybe not going to be able to germinate. If they do germinate, they're going to be spindly and leggy and not as tough as they could be if they were allowed to grow with direct sunlight access. Okay. So densely planted crop, rapid canopy closure, less light for weeds, weed suppression. All right. Now, variety selection, is Brett Carver in the room? Okay, good. Okay, so I had a really good conversation with Brett Carver yesterday. He's our wheat breeder. Brett was really interested in this competition stuff. And I was like, Brett, do you know how rapidly your different varieties establish? He was like, well, we can kind of talk about like late maturing and early maturing, but I don't know very much about the root architecture, right? Which is a component of resource access. He was like, I don't really know what was he saying? The leaf angle. So he and I really got into a discussion about, should we try to add some kind of competition component to the current varieties that we have so that producers can, it's just an additional piece of information to make you really frustrated when you're trying to figure out what varieties to select, right? But rapid establishment is really, really important. This was kind of a fancy paper. It's more of a breeding paper, but they made a really, really good point in here. Wheat cultivars with more vigorous shoots tend to possess larger roots. Okay, all right, that kind of makes sense. But one study demonstrated that the mature root system of a vigorous wheat accumulated up to 66 more carbon than less vigorous commercial varieties. And when you have a denser and more aggressive root system, they are more efficient at accessing nitrogen and phosphorus from the soil. Okay. We're actually doing a competition study right now, and we are looking at the roots, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. It's not impossible, okay? Where there is a will, there is a way. So, but like the TLDR, larger root systems, more root hairs, greater access to soil resources, which in turn results in a more resilient and a more competitive crop. The other thing I was telling Brett, and something I kind of like, very general rule of thumb when I teach weed science, which is not, it's very, very general. What you see above ground is probably what you can expect below ground. We all know there are exceptions to that, right? But if you have a really, really bushy crop, you can see it above ground, you've probably got bushy roots. And that's very advantageous in the great state of Oklahoma. We could have a flood in the fall, and then we could have a drought in the spring. So if you have a really dense root system, even if it's not dense, if it's deep, those wheat plants are accessing moisture at depth. And we have our fall emerging weeds, our grassy weeds. Then we have our spring emerging. If this crop is already really deep and really tall, the canopy is closed, probably going to have a lot less seed germination in the spring, right? And even if those seeds do germinate, they can't compete with those root systems that are already established. Leaf architecture, I don't want to belabor this. This is a little too much in the weeds. That's a crappy joke. Sorry. Okay. Okay. And then this was the other thing that actually surprised me a little bit. My original assumption was an early maturing variety will come up very quickly, and you want a crop that rapidly establishes, right? But this cultural weed control guide from the Integrated Weed Management Guide, what they actually are saying is early leaf shed. So an early maturing variety, early leaf shed allows more light to penetrate the canopy and allows weeds to develop later in the season. So if you're double cropping from wheat to something else, this, there's trade-offs to everything, right? But if you have a later maturing variety and that canopy stays closed and it stays dense later into the season, you're going to have fewer weeds that come up. So what were we talking about? Like the freaking henbit that comes up, right? If you can have a lot of shading, you're not going to have as much of those issues in the spring, right? And if it's early maturing, those leaves are going to shed. And so if you're trying to plant into a summer crop, maybe you don't want the dense crop, maybe you do. But from a weed control perspective, I was actually a little surprised to see this comparison between late and early maturing varieties. And then plant height. So this, let me check my time. So this was also really interesting. Something tall is scarier than something small. Okay, fine, whatever. I don't can we really apply that to plants all the time? This particular article actually kind of says yes. What they found is in their study, they're looking at wheat competition against Italian ryegrass, very specifically. And I think this is from Australia. But what they found is wheat height measured throughout the growing season in weed-free plots was strongly associated with weed suppressive ability, but high tillering capacity had no significant effect on weed suppression. So Brett and I were having this conversation about competition, and he was like, well, what about tillering? Like, wouldn't that kind of influence competition? And I said, well, maybe. And then I went and looked this up. And height is a massive indicator of competition. We also, I think we're going to get into biomass. So turns out tall plant bigger than small plant, right? And it is actually that simple. Like, it doesn't have to be this super complicated thing. These taller plants are shading out the shorter plants and the plants that have not yet emerged. Now, we really get complicated when your weeds and your crop emerge at the same time, but that's not what we're talking about right now, okay? So let's get into some research. So I found a marketing pamphlet from Syngenta for Cruiser Max recently, and I was talking to my rep, and I said, hey, you're making some bold claims on this pamphlet. Have you tested any of this stuff? Competition is measurable. And he was like, well, I think so. So not my field agronomy partner, but the marketing team at Syngenta gave me some money to do this experiment because turns out they want some data. So what we did was we took Cruiser Max Vibrance Elite. So this is technically an insecticide and a fungicide. I am not a virus or a bug girly. I am only a plant scientist. So I haven't even looked at this technology from the perspective of the insecticide fungicide component, right? Like, there's actually a lot of opportunities with this. It's a seed treatment. But if you go to this website, and you scroll down to the bottom, they've got all these little benefits of this product. And one of the benefits says boosts root power. Okay. What is KS root power? Okay, fine. Boosts rooting power for faster, more uniform emergence, stronger plants and roots, and quicker speed to canopy. Stronger is an interesting word, but quicker speed to canopy. Roots, right? I saw all this stuff and was like, okay, all right, let's measure this. So my students and I set up an experiment. My background is more biology, ecology. I did some herbicide work during my PhD, but the thing that I'm really good at and the thing that I enjoy the most is more ecology type stuff. So what you're looking at here is an ecology experimental design. This is called an additive design, and it's basically where you are mimicking an infestation, okay? So what you see on the far left side is there's 20 wheat plants in a square foot, okay? We have untreated wheat plants, wheat seeds. We have Cruiser Max Vibrance Elite treated seeds, and then we have varying infestation rates. So when there's 5 plants, that's 25% competition. 10 plants is 50% competition, and 20 Italian ryegrass plants with 20 wheat plants, that's 100% competition. Okay, so Yes, we did this in a greenhouse. You're right. It's not like the field environment. Okay. But my boss told me I need to publish. So we're doing this experiment in the greenhouse. Okay. So this was really, really fascinating because what we found was the wheat seedling height, when it is treated, when wheat all by itself is treated versus wheat all by itself untreated, it was significantly taller than untreated. And then when the infestation rate was only at 25%, so 5 plants, the treated wheat again was taller than the untreated wheat under this low infestation scenario. Now it starts to kind of even out. When your infestation gets higher, when you have 10 Italian ryegrass for 20 wheat and 20 Italian ryegrass for 20 wheat plants, those height differences kind of start to level out because you're starting to see more competition between the species. And this is the other thing that I thought was really important. This is Italian ryegrass emergence. So we saw there was no significant difference in emergence of wheat, whether it was treated or untreated. There was a tiny little difference, but it was not statistical, so we're not going to talk about it. But we also looked at this Italian ryegrass emergence, and what you're seeing here is at the low infestation scenario, when Italian ryegrass was in the presence of treated wheat, it actually emerged significantly less often compared to when it was in the presence of untreated wheat. It almost emerged 100% when it was in the presence of untreated wheat. But when it was in the presence of treated wheat, we dropped all the way down to about 45%. That's pretty cool. I don't know about you. I think that's pretty cool. This is a great result in my opinion. But I was talking to my master's student, and I was like, Sushmita, what's going on? Like, why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing these differences at low infestation scenarios? And then the results that we're seeing kind of even off at these like higher infestation scenarios. And I'm not a geneticist. We're not going to get into that. But what I think is happening is that wheat is having a stress response. So, any of the grad students in here, anybody in here ever heard of cytochrome P450s? Okay, Michael, thank God. Yes, okay. So what might actually be happening is that wheat plant is sensing those weeds and it is sensing them photosynthesizing. And so it is a light reflectant, very generally speaking, it's a light reflectant response where the wheat is like, oh crap, there is a weed, there is someone not like me right next to me, and it grows faster. It stresses and says, oh, I need to grow taller and bigger and badder so that I can outcompete this weed growing next to me. And we've actually seen that with other species. I just didn't want to bother y'all with that today. But that's probably what's happening here. That's why it's taller. That's why these Italian ryegrass plants are being suppressed, right? But we got to give our wheat a fighting chance, because when you get 10 Italian ryegrass, those effects, like the value of that seed treatment kind of drops off. Okay. So another study that we're doing right now that's also kind of related to variety selection. Dr. Silva and I've talked to her about competition a little bit, and I have a grad student working on this right now. So what we're looking at are whole systems. Okay, so fall, combinations of fall and spring weed control. So each one of these has fall weed control and spring weed control. We had 2 different planting dates. Misha was really working on planting date. And so Amanda said, let's incorporate that and like keep jumping off from where she finished. So we have an October planting date. This was, I think, pretty smack in the middle of October, like October 20th. And then November planting date. We use 3 different varieties. So we're using an orange blossom. It's a Clearfield Plus variety, right? So that's the only one that's going to get sprayed with our Amazamox. Orange blossom is tall and it's late maturing. And so if I were a gambler, I would put my money on the orange blossom because A, it's tall, and B, it's going to be there for longer. And it's a Clearfield variety. Pretty sure we have a Mazamox resistant weeds in all of our field sites, but that is a spring problem, not a fall problem. So we're using orange blossom. Smith's Gold is a shorter stature variety, so not as tall. And then Butler's Gold is a medium stature variety, but it's early maturing. I could not figure out the maturity of Smith's Gold. I assume it's very similar to Butler's Gold, but I'm excited to see the differences in these varieties in the spring. Quite frankly, all of our fields look a little trashy right now. They've got weeds in them, which, I'm trying to kill the weeds. So if we don't have the weeds, it's hard for me to do my job. But we're not really seeing any differences in variety right now. But we are going to measure weed control. We have been measuring weed control 3, 7, 14, 21, and 28 days after application, whatever that weed control application was. The biomass of the weeds, so a big bushy weed is going to be more competitive than a tiny little spindly weed. Canopy cover, we can measure that using a light meter. And then we're going to take yield. So far, the only conclusion that we can kind of come to is that our late planted plots at all 3 of our field sites in Perkins, Lahoma, and Chickasha, very different environments, all 3 of those. But the one thing that we're seeing at all 3 of those sites is that our late planted are a lot cleaner than our October planted. And I know that people that are planting earlier in the season, they're more likely to be dual purpose. Our grain only producers have a little bit more flexibility with that planting time, but those winter annual weeds need cool temperatures and moisture to germinate, right? So if we wait until we get those cool temperatures around 55 degrees average Fahrenheit, around that temperature plus moisture, those winter annual weeds are going to come up. We had a big flush before our November planting. We tilled them down, we sprayed them down, and now those plots look, I say trashy, they look cleaner than our October planted fields. Okay, so yep, that was it. Okay, I did good. I made the time. Does anyone have any questions? It's 8 a.m. Yes, sir. Of ryegrass. So the question was about allelopathic properties, influences of ryegrass on wheat. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm not an allelopathy person. That definitely could be happening. But when the wheat and the Italian ryegrass are growing this close together, who was I talking to? It was Brett. I was talking to Brett about allelopathy from canola, because canola is a mustard and mustards have some natural. And he said, well, what's the level of allelopathy and what does that have influence on? And I don't know for Italian ryegrass, but for the mustards, suppressing seed germination. So they're not necessarily suppressing plants that are actively growing, but they're suppressing germination. So for Italian ryegrass, I don't know. It could be allelopathic. I don't have enough data on that. Yeah. No questions? Y'all seem to have a lot of talk about back there in the back section. No questions, comments, concerns, requests? TJ Libby. All right, so now I want to invite my colleague, Michael Flessner, up to the stage. And Michael, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Check, check. All right, we're on. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Flussner, privileged to be a professor and extension weed specialist at Virginia Tech, which is our land grant in the state of Virginia. I work mostly with corn, soybeans, small grains, also have some pasture forage responsibilities. But I'm excited to talk about today something we've been researching for about 10 years now, kind of collectively called harvest weed seed control. And I know that, this is my first trip to Oklahoma. I know you guys probably farm a little bit different, but probably a lot of things are the same. Just like every operation in the room is probably a little bit different. So I'm hoping to give you guys just some ideas, some things to think about holistically, like Dr. Galvin was talking about with, our weed management plans really has to go, I think, beyond herbicides because of all the herbicide resistance we have. And so this is kind of one way that really the Australians have really pioneered that maybe we can adapt and also adopt here to help us with our herbicide resistance issues here. All right, so how many of you have gone out to harvest and you've got a situation that looks like this, or maybe your customers have, where combine's ready to go, the crop's ready, the grain trucks are there, everything's ready to go, and you've got these weed seeds on the plant at the time of harvest, right? I'm sure that's happened at least one season, one was along the way, yeah. And so what happens if you run the combine through those weed seeds and those weeds, right? Combine is going to spread those things out, right? And it's not going to put them right back where it found them. It's going to spread them out 2, 3, 4, maybe 500 feet down the field. It might drag some of those, get stuck in there somewhere, and they're going to shake loose in the next field, right? That didn't have any weeds in it, right? And so it's an excellent spreader of weed seeds there. And I think it's worth noting that these aren't just any weed seeds, right? These are the ones that have beaten us. They've come through our herbicide program. They come through our crop competition. They are adapted to our crop rotations and our management uniquely in that single field. And we're going to take those and we're going to reward those weed seeds and spread them out, right, with the harvest operation. And I get it. You got to get the crop out. There's not much you can do about it. You're not going to go out there and hand pull that. But it's really, it makes this combine a sort of an enemy of ours in a sense there. And so this is a picture from Ray Harrington's farm in Western Australia, and he was one of the pioneers of developing these seed impact mills, which go in the back of combines and grind up the seeds. And so it's really an opportunity to try to turn the combine from a spreader of weed seeds into a predator of weed seeds. But really what drove him back into the corner was kind of getting back to his herbicide resistance, is that he had herbicide resistance to the point where he had to innovate and change what he was doing and find a different way to help manage these weeds, or he wasn't going to be sustainable in the wheat business and probably not grain farming in general. So it's innovate or get out. And so he wanted to try to address this and see what he could do to take advantage of the situation where we've got all the weed seeds coming through the combine. Can we do something about them? Some of his counterparts in Australia had been doing what's called narrow windrow burning, which is kind of another way of implementing harvest weed seed control, in that you put everything in a windrow, just like you're going to bale it for straw, the chaff, the weed seeds in there, and then you can come back and light those on fire. And compared to whole field burning, which maybe some of you guys have done, putting that fuel, the crop residues there in that windrow, makes it burn hotter and it makes it burn longer than if you spread those out, right? And so you can kill weed seeds this way. We've looked at it. We've researched it. We can kill some Italian ryegrass this way. But there's obviously some risk associated with these and trade-offs like everything in agriculture. The risk of fire escape is real, right? Because these burn slower than like a whole field, you can control when you start the fire, but maybe when it's a big field 7, 8 hours later, what's the weather going to be like then? Is the wind going to pick up and get things out of control? And I can tell you that in our research, I think the statute of limitations is up, but we lost control of a fire and it burned about 20 acres of farmer's field that I was working with. And I didn't think I'd be standing here today. That's when that happened. It was terrifying. But agronomically, a lot of that smoke has got carbon in it, right? And if we're interested in building our soil organic matter, which helps with nutrient cycling, which helps with water holding capacity, which helps with soil health, we don't want that carbon going up in the air if we can help it. We'd rather it go down into the soil and build that organic matter, at least to the extent that we can. There's also about half of your nitrogen in that crop residue is going off in smoke too, which again, we would like to, if as much as we can, get it to decompose and then become plant available for future crops there. So agronomically, this isn't the best. And obviously it's maybe not the best look for agriculture in general. And we don't need to give those kind of folks any more fuel for their fire, so to speak. So Ray Harrington didn't want to do this. What he ended up doing was kind of making this hammer mill, or seed impact mill. This is an early prototype here that they came out. It was actually commercially available for sale for a little while. Of course, nobody wants to pull a trailer, but you can kind of see. So I think so. So here's the kind of replumbs a little bit. The chaff goes in here. This is the mill here. The straw fraction just actually goes on a conveyor belt underneath and then spread out behind this machine. But that was an earlier prototype, just sort of proof of concept, and it seemed to work. So they kept going and innovated. And what's on the market today is the IHSD, or Integrated Harrington Seed Destructor. And so here it is on the back of a case combine. So this is mechanically driven from the combine. You add a belt to the side, and it has twin mills, a left and right mill. And this is sort of a look under the hood. There's a panel that covers this box, but the chaff and weed seeds would fall into here. They get cross-augered, and there's actually quite a bit of suction from these mills too, over to these mills. And then there's really, it's not very scientific here. We're just smacking weed seeds basically with cold hard steel. And so you break seed coats, you break seeds in half. You can actually recognize some of the stuff coming out of that as a weed seeds, but a lot of times it's damaged internally. And so it's killing those weed seeds before spreading them out. And that's a nice one-pass operation. There also are some other manufacturers of this. So IHSD is manufactured by De Bruin out of Australia. Redicop has been making aftermarket straw choppers for a while, and some other ag equipment. But they make the SCU, the seed control unit, and they're based out of Canada. So this is still twin mills, but they're mounted horizontally here, mechanically driven there. And then there's also a seed terminator, which is out of Australia. And I don't know if I hit. Yeah, so you can kind of see, obviously in operation, this would be all closed up and there'd be a belt where the gentleman's hands are there. But basically the material is falling into the middle of these rings, these stators and rotors. Some are stationary, some are spinning about 3,000 RPM in operation. And the material has to get through those screens or those bars to get out there. So there's 3 of them on the market. There's the 4th one that is sort of in development. But you can kind of think of it as your Ford, Chevy, Dodge, right? They all make trucks. People have their preferences. They have a little bit different features, but they're basically all make a truck that goes down the road there. So here's kind of the inside of what would be in the IHSD. So some of these are stationary, some of these spinning. These are wear parts, so these were some worn out ones. And this is kind of what the material from a wheat harvest looks like coming out of that. So it's not total dust, but it is a little bit dustier operation there. All right. And then just sort of show you that it is just a regular looking harvest at that point, right? But you are drawing power from the combine, so you're going to burn some more diesel, and we'll kind of get into that there. But that's what it looks like. So this sounds great, right? Let's look at that from our perspective. There's a couple of shots from Virginia. We've got our pigweed issues in soybeans. This is actually common ragweed, all the dark stuff in what's supposed to be a soybean field at harvest. That's one of our more challenging ones where I'm sure you have some of your own there, right? So we have our weeds there present at harvest. I think you guys already kind of agreed to that. So let's move through this. The first question we have is are the weed seeds actually there on the plant at the time of harvest, right? We've got different weed species than Australians do, different harvest conditions. If the weeds aren't on the plant at the time of harvest, right, the seeds have already fallen to the ground. The combine's not a vacuum. It's not going to suck those seeds back up. We've got to have them on the plant to be able to get them into it. So we had a sort of national collaboration of various states, and we did this kind of real crude experiment of just let the weeds grow with the crop until the weeds started flowering. Once they started flowering, we'd get rid of the crop and put out these trays, and then we'd catch the seed and see how many were on there as that crop got ready for harvest here. And this is a kind of a big summary of what it is for our soybean weeds. The broadleaves are on the right, and the grasses are on the left here. And there's 3 columns here. One is the seed retention, and that's what we were really measuring in our studies. And so you want a high seed retention rate, as we already talked about. But we also like to couple that with a low seed survival, right? Seeds that are only going to persist for maybe 3, 4, 5 years, because we'd like to see it change, for our efforts, right? If it's going to be a weed seeds that last 10 years on the farm, well, we got to implement harvest weed seed control and nail it every year for 10 years to see a difference. That's not really going to add up. So then you sort of see we just sort of a qualitative harvest weed seed control potential there. And so, you look at some of these are better targets than others, as you might expect, right? And this isn't going to be an answer for every single weed. But when you think about, at least nationally, our problematic weeds and soybeans that have herbicide resistance, the Palmer amaranth, the common water hemp, and others, you see that we have some pretty excellent opportunities here for harvest weed seed control to work. High seed retention, relatively low seed survival there. Grasses, maybe not so much. The other thing to think about here is something like Johnson grass, right? It's a perennial with rhizomes. You guys have Johnson grass here? Because okay, yeah, everyone's okay. All right, not everybody at once. Yeah, so you guys are very familiar. It's got rhizomes, right? It also spreads by seed, so we can stop the spread of it, but we're not going to do anything for the rhizomes, obviously, with this technique there. So there's those kind of things to think about with species here. The wheat weeds, and this is a compilation from the literature there that's out there, aren't maybe as nice to look at, right? There's fairs and poors here, not so many excellents and goods. But what I would say is like something like Italian ryegrass or farrow rye, there's kind of ranges here, 50 to 90%. And some of that's, some data like the Pacific Northwest might have found that it was 50%. And then in Kansas, they found like 90%. And it seems to be more variable with these winter annual grasses in terms of what their seed retention is. So maybe you look at this, you're like, all right, man, I've got Italian ryegrass, and if I'm only going to go to all this trouble to get maybe 60% of those, I'm out, and I get that. But like I said, this is also keeping those weed seeds from spreading. And so there's some farmers in Canada that have a real big problem with wild oat, the one on the bottom there, right? And it's poor, right? It doesn't look like it's a very good opportunity for harvest weed seed control, but because they have so few management options for that weed, if they can just keep the patches in that spot and keep them from spreading, that's still a win for them, right? Because they don't have a way to control them there. So that's something to think about there. This would be some anecdotal evidence that I would offer. So this is a picture of one of our farmer fields in the eastern shore of Virginia. So that's actually the Chesapeake Bay up there. It's kind of a unique part of the world because you're kind of rural and isolated. I suspect some of you guys might like it. They like farming, they like fishing, and they like to drink cold beer there. But that's not the point of the picture. They've got, this is barley, and you see all these lines out here. And that's Italian ryegrass in that barley fields that's getting ready for harvest. And what they do in the eastern shores, they've got a market for the straw up in Pennsylvania for mushroom compost. And so they will windrow, and then they'll bale the straw, and that's going to put all those seeds right in a line. And then the seeds don't go with the baler, at least not all of them. And so you're left with those streaks in it. So we know these, even though maybe Italian ryegrass isn't the best for seed retention, it's still coming through the combine and ending up there. And if you can imagine, if we could kill all those weed seeds that were in the lines, we'd have a much better looking field there come harvest time there. Well, we did do some of our experiments out there, yeah. But that was just windrowed with conventional harvest. Yep, yeah. Okay. We'll get to that. And it's your curiosity is spot on. How does it handle that higher moisture and green material? So we've got some pictures of that. So good. All right, so if the seed's retained, that's great. We also have to get it into the combine and then get it from exiting the combine into the seed impact mill for this to work, right? So the fate of those seeds once they're there. And this is actually the header is something that's kind of under researched in this area. There's just a little bit of evidence out here. This is a University of Missouri paper. 22 to 40% of the water hemp seeds drop to the soil surface due to contact with the reel or cutter bar. And so that's real heartbreaking actually, because you saw 95% or better seed retention at the time of harvest, or the first opportunity for harvest. And then you're just knocking them off, right? And so you guys know, there's probably some combine adjustments here we can do. A lot of times you're setting that reel speed and the reel height and the position for the crop, which is obviously what we want, but those weeds are up there, they're taller, and so sometimes you bulldoze those weeds instead of coming over there and pulling them onto the table, if you will. So I think that's something out there that we could probably look at for better management, but we're still getting at least the majority of those weed seeds into the header there on that one. One thing we've looked at is weeds in corn, right? And if you guys grow corn, you know that the corn header works a lot differently. And if you kind of do this math of how many weed seeds end up on the ground right through the header, how many are coming out of the back, which potentially we could subject to a harvest weed seed control. And then from my perspective, if it ends up in the grain tank, that's all off the field, and that's good for weed management. I get that, you can only do that so much, and then you're going to start seeing docks at the elevator. But this math is about 75% of the weed seeds are going through the corn header and getting on the ground. So it's probably not going to be something we can use in corn very effectively. But that's some preliminary research that's out there. But we do know that the weed seeds are getting there from a lot of the data in terms of it does seem to be working in Australia and being adopted from that. Okay, so the next step is if it's into the header, we've got to get it to the seed impact mill. And so I know you guys are probably fairly familiar with the combine, but just so we're all on the same page, right? The crop comes in, goes through the feeder house, and then it goes into the rotor, which really has a thresher part to separate the grain from the rest of the plant. It's also going to be separating the weed seeds, hopefully, from the rest of the plant for this. And then the separator, right? Getting those seeds out of the rest of the material. And then that larger residues, the straw fraction, are going to go out towards the back. But the seeds, and this is where the weed seeds should be ending up, should land on the sieves, right? And then along with the chaff, right? And that's where we separate the wheat from the chaff. But the weed seeds are going to exit, hopefully, if we got everything set right off the end of the shoe there. But in a lot of combines, the Cases and the John Deeres, these come back together and then go through the spreader or the spreader and chopper, depending on which machine you have. So we've got to add this baffle here. And so all those, the seed terminator, the IHSD, the Redicop seed control unit, they all have this as part of the installation here. But I think it's important to note that that's got to be there to then direct the weed seeds, keep those two streams separate. So we're not putting everything coming out of the back through that seed impact mill. It's just the small fraction where the weed seeds are. And so in soybeans, that's about 15% of your crop residue. In wheat, that's about 30%, so about double in wheat that's going through that. All right, so we're all on the same page. So we wanted to measure that, and we had some fun here. So we poured some weed seeds through a funnel into the feeder house, known quantities, and then we tried to catch as much as we could coming out of the back, and then we went and found the needle in a haystack to try to figure out, were we losing seeds through the straw chopper, right? Because if it's coming out through there, it's not going to that seed impact mill, and we're not killing those weed seeds. So we did this in a few scenarios. This is an IHSD in soybean. So this is passing through the straw. So that's the ones that are going to be escaping. So we want these to be short, low bars. And you see the scale here is 0 to 2%. So regardless of the weed species up there, and there were some differences between species, but agronomically speaking, we were getting the weed seeds either into the grain tank or to the seed impact mill, but they weren't leaving the combine in the wrong spot. Same thing basically with the Redicop seed control unit, maybe a little bit more, but still less than 4%. And then the Redicop seed control unit in wheat, really on average, still less than at least 5% there. Interesting, the hairy vetch, we didn't get any. I think it all went to the grain tank. But but yeah, that's so very good numbers there for the seed fate. We poured in clean weed seed of a known quantity, and experimentally you've got to make some decisions like that. And that might be a little bit of overestimation, right? Because that's not how weed seeds come into the combine. They come in attached to a plant. They've got to get threshed off. So this is a paper from Arkansas. I'll just direct your attention here to the common cocklebur and palmer and the chaff fraction. That's the one that would go to the seed impact mill. 75% of the burrs of common cocklebur ended up there, and 85% of palmer amaranth seeds there. So we might have overestimated a little bit, but still, I think very favorable numbers in terms of we're getting the weed seeds where they need to go. And there's tons of combine settings, tons of harvest conditions. That was just based on the farmer adjusting it to get clean grain into the grain tank and minimal loss off the back, just like you'd want to set up your combine. So if you're setting up your combine the way we would all want to, then you should be getting the seeds where they want to go. But one more sort of data column on this. This is also from University of Missouri, and they had a lot of sites, years, and different weeds they were looking at. But this column here to the right is the one of interest: reduction in field deposition of weed seed due to the seed terminator. So this would have been accounted for both weed seeds that didn't go through the seed terminator, as well as seeds that may have come through the seed terminator and survived. And you can see some of these numbers are very favorable, 90, 97%. Some, maybe not so much in certain years, 63%, I think is the lowest one up there. But still, I think, favorable numbers there for us to kind of keep wanting to look at this. All right, then the one I think most people are interested in is, all right, we're getting the weed seeds to this mill? Is this mill actually killing the weed seeds, right? And so that's something we wanted to test. We're lucky to have stationary test stands that we could use for the Redicop and for the IHSD that were powered just from the PTO of a tractor. That allowed us to do a lot more different weed species. We could do different chaff flow rates, different chaff moisture levels, and see how that affected the kill. As you can imagine, doing it on farm, which we also did, and this time we've got the grad students in the engine bay and the funnels going down into the actual seed impact mill. We've got a big mesh bag there to catch anything coming out of it. We wanted to do that as much as we could, but obviously pouring, herbicide-resistant weed seeds into somebody's combine is kind of a tough sell sometimes. So the stationary test stands really came in handy. All right, so what did we see? Both with the Redicop and the IHSD, for all the soybeans we tested, the lowest one was 98.6 or better, or sorry, 98.3 or better. So we're killing those weed seeds if they're getting to that mill by and large there. At least in the soybean seeds. And that was the test stand data. In the wheat weeds, we had one that wasn't quite as easily killed, and that one's Italian ryegrass. And so you see here, maybe 94% of Italian ryegrass was killed. The other species we tested there were, except for annual ryegrass, were all, again, well over 98%. So the Italian ryegrass, that was a weedy population we collected from our fields in Virginia. The annual ryegrass was the same species. It's still Lolium paren, subspecies multiflorum, but that's a domesticated type. If you're going to buy for forage, you get the seed from the co-op, and so it was maybe a little bit easier to kill there. But that's the tough one, and that's the one that's really rigid ryegrass in Australia is what they're really, this whole technology is developed around, and so that's really the one that they also struggle with the most in terms of kill rate. So that's the one that's a little bit lower, but still 90% or better is kind of hard to complain about there. Those numbers really aligned when we got to, again, we couldn't test as much on the combines, but what we could test on the combines, the numbers really aligned very well. Everything was over 98% controlled except for the annual ryegrass there. So very high seed kill rates if we can get the seeds to those mills. All right, so then the question obviously is, we do this out there on the farm, are we actually seeing real world differences, right? And so that's kind of where we're going next is can we see differences in these plots here? And we've been doing this for a while, but unfortunately we don't have a whole lot of data to share just yet. But what I will share is what we did, and this was on the eastern shore of Virginia in Italian ryegrass, is that in 2021 we harvested 4 fields and we had areas that were on where we used the seed impact mill. In this case it was a Redicop seed control unit, and areas that were off. And then that farmer that went through corn in 2022 came back to wheat that fall. And then we measured things that following spring in 2023. So that's kind of the cropping system we're in, just to give you the context here. And then sort of summarizing all that, in spring of 2023, we saw a 48% reduction where we used the seed impact mill, that one harvest, compared to where we didn't. So that's, I think that's a pretty good result. Obviously, if you're spraying a herbicide and you get 48% kill, you're probably calling up your rep and you're a little unhappy with that, right? But you got to think of, we're only managing inputs to the seed bank. If we've got a high seed bank already there and infested in the field, we've got to exhaust that before we really start seeing differences. Really, this is something we're going to have to implement successfully for multiple years in a row. Some of our other numbers are more 28 to 30% with 1 year after harvest. We've seen that in soybeans as well as some other stuff in wheat. So we are moving the needle in the right direction, but it's not something that's going to be up there overnight. And the other thing I'd say, we went from about 16 plants per meter squared to about 8 in this particular data on average. I would love to show you a picture where you could see like, bam, there it was used and there it wasn't. But that density wasn't really, something like ryegrass that's going to till her out. Visually, you really couldn't tell. But when we did the numbers, it was a real difference there. So some other findings out there, back to this Missouri paper in soybeans, consecutive seasons of use for 2 seasons basically resulted in 96 and 97% reduction of water hemp in the seed bank in the spring following harvest. So that's pretty impressive though. After 2 years, they were getting it down that much that quickly. That was a little bit different measurement. We measured what was emerging. I think they actually did measurements of the seeds in the soil there to come up with that number, but still a pretty impressive number there in soybeans from that. So here's kind of what I think we should be expecting if we were to adopt this. So these are numbers from Australia, and this is what they call annual ryegrass. We would call rigid ryegrass, Lolium rigidum, which is a closer related but a little different species than Italian ryegrass. So here you can see over time with herbicides and then with herbicides plus harvest weed seed control with the seed impact mills. And so the bottom line is where we added the harvest weed seed control to. And you can see over time, they did get, I think, some new herbicides on the market to help them get the ryegrass infestation back under control. But it took, 2 or 3 years really to start getting lower numbers, and then 5, 6, maybe 7 years before it really kind of bottomed out. But still, this is a pretty big difference here of, maybe you're like, all right, if I can do that with herbicides, I'll just do that with herbicides. But I would say this right here, the two together is really our key to sustainable weed management. Whether we're using herbicides or seed impact mills or tillage, if we can get the seed bank really low, that means we're exposing very few individuals to that management, right? And that's much harder for those fewer individuals to have the diversity in them to overcome that management and adapt to that management. So really, this is really the key where we want to be, but we're not going to get there overnight. But I do think this is a tool that can help us. All right, it's not without its challenges, right? Otherwise, we'd all be doing this already, right? And so moisture can be one of the challenges. This is we got this thing out there. We started running it, and the very first thing we did was we plugged up the back of the combine within about 20 minutes. And this is a little bit of, that's not really fair because we're sort of figuring out how to adjust the combine. You put that on the back and you're really changing some of the airflow and that kind of stuff. And so we had to figure that out. And really, honestly, as long as we were on a Class 8 combine or bigger and we were in a dry crop, we were able to run. It's where we were on smaller combines and we had challenging higher moisture, green content in there. That's where we've had issues. And so this is what can happen when things get bad. Tried to be, equal opportunity to all makes and models of these seed impact mills here. But this is in soybeans here. We have this green stem in soybeans sometimes at early harvest. I don't know if you guys have that here or not. And that's okay. All right. That's probably not going to work with this. And the real frustration there is we want to get there as soon as we can, because the sooner we can get there, obviously the yield quality is generally better, but more weed seeds are still going to be on the plant at that time, right? So we want to be able to get as many weed seeds into this mill to kill as possible. So we want a timely harvest, but I think some of the rules on here that the farmers have sort of developed is like, if it's 20% green, that's too much. And I don't really know what that means, but that's what I've heard. So if you look at the field, it's sort of 20% green, then that's too much. There are some things you can try to do. This situation here, I think, was an issue where we weren't getting the big fraction over top of the baffle far enough. So I don't know if you could speed up like that, an internal beater kind of thing in there to send that further back, because it was kind of falling down to the end of the shoe, and then it was coming and actually wasn't plugging the mill, but it was plugging the mill entrance there was an issue. So there are some issues with moisture, and I think it's a serious concern. I know a seed terminator, which would be this one with the screens, they're actually offering 3 different screen sizes now. One is the high seed kill rate. One is kind of a medium. It's higher capacity, but your seed kill rate is going to drop a little bit. And then there's one that's this really high capacity where your seed kill is probably down. I think it goes basically like 90, 80 to 60% on ryegrass, which again was that toughest one to kill. But you were able to harvest in tougher conditions and tougher crops as well there. All right, these also, cost money, right? Like everything. And this is a little bit of an older slide, but yeah, $75,000 plus maybe some fitting costs to get it on there is kind of what these things run. But when you look at that price, over the life of the equipment, the number of acres you run it over, what the Australian farmers have told us, and I've got some other numbers at the end I'll share about cost, is that this is about the price of a cheap herbicide pass. And so, $10 an acre isn't, I don't think, unreasonable to try to implement something like this. But I get that commodity prices are what they are. We're not already spraying a herbicide after harvest to try to kill weed seeds, right? So it is an added cost. All right, here's what they found in Missouri. The seed terminator was $5.74 an acre, so a little cheaper than what I just told you. But there are some engine loads we're adding to the combine, and we're also adding, more moving parts on a piece of farm equipment that has probably the most moving parts. I don't know, maybe the baler rivals it, but the combine's got a lot of moving parts on it. But the engine load increase, as you would expect, they burn about 4 gallons more fuel per hour, or 0.65 gallons per acre. But again, they were on a Class 8 or larger combine. There was no reduction in productivity when harvesting with the seed terminator compared to a conventional combine there. All right, so maybe you're like, all right, see, that seems like a lot of stuff. Is there an easier way to do this? And this is what I would say is the easier way to do it. You want to just try it out. Maybe this is the way to go. Chaff lining. All right, so in chaff lining, we're basically doing all that other stuff the same, except that instead of funneling it into the seed impact mill, we're just funneling it onto the ground. All right, so we're still spreading out the straw. It's just the chaff. And so that's going to leave a chaff line as it goes through the field. And this is kind of what that looks like. There's my first Australian chaff line there. So you can get these kits out of Australia. I think delivered, last I checked, was $5,000 to $6,000. We made this one ourselves. A lot of farms have some stuff laying around. Probably took us about a day. The first one I did, it probably took us about 3 days because where to put that baffle, how far in and how high, and the angle of it was a bit of a mystery. And so I'm happy to talk with you if you're interested in exactly kind of what to look for here. But one of the things is we started out kind of flat and realized it needed to be pretty steep from the get-go so that it would shed any material landing on top of it because that was plugging it up. So there were some learning curves there, but you can do this, I think, if you're mechanically minded, kind of on your own for fairly cheap, certainly less than $500 if you got some stuff lying around. So this is kind of what to expect, though. We're not killing weed seeds. That's the trade-off here, but we are confining them to maybe 10% of the field or less. So just one pass through the middle. And you should expect weed seeds to come up through the middle. So this is, again, from Australian results there, where they were saying that they saw 43 to 80% reduction in that rigid ryegrass across some of the sites that they were looking at. We've done some small plot work, and we're actually trying to do some stuff with farmers now. It's kind of what it looked like was we try to get some chaff from a weed-free field. We put that out in the experiment station and by hand infested those lines, and then look at what came up as we went through a wheat cropping rotation as well. We went through a soybean cropping rotation there. And just to summarize what we found there, we've got a pile of residue in the field where the chaff is, right? And that can affect both the crop and the weeds. So on the crop, the chaff inhibited the subsequent crop emergence, especially the wheat chaff. The wheat chaff is more nitrogen than soybean chaff, and there's about double of it, like I said earlier. So it tends to stick around longer, and there's more of it, and that tended to be more problematic. So if we were double cropping soybeans after wheat, you can see here's one of our plots that are small plot combine at harvest. We didn't get anything come up through there, and you can see that the ryegrass is coming up there. That being said, you've got one of these every, however wide your header is. So if you got a 30-foot wide header, you've got one of these for every 30 feet. And at the field scale, we didn't notice any yield reductions when you did that math, except for one time out of 12 site years in wheat where we had about a 5% yield loss there. So some exposure to risk there, but not a huge one there. But had this been a planter with a row cleaner and we could kind of bulldoze our way through that chaff line, maybe that would have been different. But this was drilled, so that's where we saw that. But on the weeds, that's kind of something that works in our favor, right? We don't want emergence of the weeds, and we're concentrating those weed seeds in there. So we did see that the more chaff we had, which is really a function of yield, so the higher yield you have, the more chaff you have. But on average, in wheat, we had a 43% reduction of emergence of Italian ryegrass as we went through that next wheat cycle after that, and a 54% reduction of wild mustard. Soybean numbers were even better, 81 and 85% reduction in common ragweed. I don't know if those weeds, that was for that, that next season, are those weed seeds that didn't emerge, are they still there? Are they going to come up in year 2, year 3? We don't know. We're trying to look at that right now. But I would say they reduce the emergence, which is something now we're condensing them and we're reducing emergence with a very passive, basically a funnel on the back of the combine. That's a little bit easier. But expect weeds to be there. How we've managed those weeds is just our standard herbicide program and crop row spacing and all that. I don't think there's something additional you have to do. Certainly there's maybe an opportunity if you wanted to there. There's one paper out of Iowa on this where they looked at it with water hemp and soybean. They found that greater than 99% of the weed seeds exited the combine into the chaff line, confining those seeds to less than 5% of the field. So that's a pretty big win versus scattering them across 100% of the field. And then in the next year's corn, The chaff lines reduced emergence by 1 week, so it emerged 1 week later, which gives your crop 1 week more of a jump to get out ahead of those weed seeds. And it slowed the growth by 60% compared to the weeds growing outside of the chaff line, right? So it seems like a tougher environment there for the weed seeds in that chaff line. So we're trying to look at this. This is some of our stuff in Virginia. Chaff lining there on commercial farms now. And like I said, this is something that I think can be done if you're willing to try it. Kind of what it looks like. This was one of our uglier versions of a chaff lining chute, just some old draper belts and some pieces of plastic kind of hung together. So I'm confident this is something you guys can do if you want to put your mind to it. And we sort of was like, well, this works, we'll do something prettier. And then it's like it worked, and well, we just kept using that. So, so there you go. All right, what does this cost? So this is based on a lot of data behind these numbers. We have a cost calculator on a website that I'll share. This is based on 1,000 acre of soybeans and 1,000 acres of wheat a year. And you imagine these numbers move a little bit in relation to that. But this takes, if there's a chaff lining, we're confining some nutrients there. So there's a little bit of a fertilizer cost behind the scenes going on there. There's the upfront cost of buying it, running it, et cetera. But the total cost per acre, what we're estimating here for chaff lining is about $5 an acre and maybe 10 to 15 bucks for one of the seed impact mills. The narrow windrow burning, which again, I don't recommend, was higher because of all those nutrients. There's a lot of fertilizer associated with that that's going on behind the scenes there. So probably the easiest way to get into harvest weed seed control, but not the cheapest in the long run there. All right, so to get it working for you, I mentioned 3 systems. There's also some other ways that chaff carts, if you want to pull a trailer behind your combine, there's some other ways to actually do harvest weed seed control. We've got to get the maximum weed seeds we can into the header, which is a timely harvest. For harvesting wheat, you guys know you're trying to harvest kind of as high as you can, right? Because that's less material coming in. But the lower we can get that header, the better chance we have of weed seeds coming in. Now, you guys have probably seen some of that Italian ryegrass. Some of it's sticking out. Some of it's kind of bent over and fallen maybe midway through the canopy. We want to get all those weed seeds in. So getting the head lower is another kind of key factor there. And then basically managing the weed seeds, get them to where they need to be in the combine after that. Dr. Galvin mentioned Grow. There's some farmer forums on there if you want to see how farmers have tried to adjust to harvest some of this green material there. Maybe you want to just hear from a farmer about their experience with trying this on farm. There's some YouTube videos on there. I've got these little rack cards here. I'll leave up here at the front on either side. If you guys want to get to the Grow website there, it's got it on there. A lot of people to thank here and funders to thank. It sounds like a good time here. But then when you're standing behind a combine in the middle of summer, covered in sweat and chaff's hitting you in the face, it's maybe not as much fun. Sometimes the tell is better than the doing. I'll just say that. But this is also a QR code to get you to the Grow website. Under the weed management toolbox, you can find harvest weed seed control and a lot more information about this. So hope I've given you guys some things to think about, maybe some things you might try. Happy to answer any questions. Yep.
Can I take online? Wait, patience.
Apologies to the folks online, but no, sometimes obviously sometimes the crop itself is the weed. So I was thinking like shatter cane and sorghum, obviously in wheat specifically. We got a lot of insect disease pressure that, likes to overwinter or seek refuge and volunteer, that sort of thing. So I'm just curious if anybody's looking at the secondary benefits of like reduced insect pressure, reduced disease pressure, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And we've thought about that a little bit in the chaff lining, where we're maybe making a sort of safe harbor for like insects to overwinter, all right, or stuff to come in there. Mostly I've thought about it from what's going on with those weeds. We've got this, instead of scattering the weed seeds, we've got this sort of trail of cookie crumbs. Are the mice and the insects that eat weeds can they just follow that and we get more weed seed predation, which would be good, right? More weed seeds dead. But no, I'm not aware of anything going along those lines, but it's an interesting question to think about. So
that third one you showed up there, the one with the silver mill on the bottom.
Mhm.
Does it actually hang down that low on the bottom of the combine?
Yeah, so all of them actually hang down fairly low in the bottom of the combine, and that is can be a concern. So if you've got a combine stuck and you've had to pull it out by that tow hook on the back, the mills are kind of in the way of that tow hook. And so I know Redicop makes an actual harness that would actually connects to the front axle, and some cables run underneath the belly of the machine to avoid having to use that tow hook so that you can pull it out safely without damaging it. But yeah, that's a concern. I will say the farmers I've worked with thought it was a concern, and they've gone across ditches and stuff to get in and out of fields, and no one's kind of bottomed one out yet, but no one's sunk one in the mud that we've had either. So
Now, I may have missed it, but what is the cost on the apparatuses?
yeah, it's about $75,000 upfront cost to purchase one. The running cost when you amortize that over the life of the equipment is we were thinking about $10 to $15 an acre, depending on how many acres you run it over. But so a little bit of sticker shock, but maybe not too bad once you spread it out.
So I have one if there's none on those the seed mills. Can you take them off? So if you got a field coming up, it's green. Do they have like a disengage or something? You could take it off knowing that you're about to hit a field that has about a bunch of green stem syndrome.
So, right, a great question. So the Redicop is probably the easiest on off. The baffle is meant to kind of fold up, and you can actually totally remove it off some pins. And then there's a part of that baffle folds and covers the mill so you can bypass it. So it's about a 5 to 10 minute, jump out of the combine, reconfigure, jump back in, and you're going again. I think they're working on basically a push button because all the farmers are asking for that. I want a button in the cab, so I get that. The other mills, to my knowledge, you can avoid using them. You have to take the belt off. So that's a little bit long, reducing the belt tension or getting that off of there, and then it stops running. But putting these on a combine, it's about a 1.5, 2 day job for a mechanic to do. So it's not something that's just going to go on and off real quick. But the Redicop is the one that does turn on and off maybe the easiest. So.
You said the fuel went up maybe 4 gallons per hour, but as far as capacity is acres per hour and stuff, how much are you slowing down with it?
Yeah, so it seems pretty variable. If you get into something where you've got to slow down and chew on it, right, because the mill can't kind of keep up, you slow down a lot, and you can even plug with the mill like as we showed. But then there's conditions where you're just running wide open, just as normal, and so what the Australians have said is basically you lose about a class of combine or about 10% capacity by adding a mill to the back. So if you're running class 9 combine, you put a mill on, expect the harvest capacity of a class 8 combine at that point. So about a 10% reduction. But again, I think it's sometimes it's a 30% reduction and you're really frustrated. And then sometimes it's wide open and it's all good. But on average, 10% is what I would expect. Thank you, guys.
This is fine. Okay. So next up. Yeah, okay. He asked me to introduce you. So next up, we have Steve Lee from Auburn. I asked Steve to come and talk about drones. I've been talking a lot about drones this year, but Steve, in my opinion, is the premier drone guy in the weed science world. So happy to have you, Steve. You can take it away.
All right. Good morning. Morning. Thank you for Dr. Galvin for inviting me. I'm a trained as weed scientist. My current job still cover weed science for responsibility, but I hate to admit I don't do a lot of weed science work anymore. Even for our county agents introducing me to to their folks, they're like, oh, this is Dr. Lee, and he's our drone specialist versus a weed scientist, And lots of people outside the state also know me. Many of them don't have no idea that I was trained in weed science. So just because of the type of things I do, but glad to be here. It's actually first invited talk for extension talk in Oklahoma. So hope I don't mess this one up. All right. So before I get into the content, I want to ask you guys a few questions. I guess all extension people really like a survey or asking these type of questions. I don't have a paper survey here today because I don't have door prizes. Usually when I do survey, I give away the door prizes. How many of you have either used a drone yourself or hired one of these people to spray for you in the crowd? A bunch? Okay. Do we have anyone here? Sorry, I can't see the vote from online. I'm sorry for those guys, joining remotely. I won't be able to see you. But how many of you actually fly these drones yourself? Do we have any? Oh, we do have a few. There you go. All right, it's good to see Oklahoma is not falling behind the pack. How many of you have seen these operations in the field yourself? Okay, good. Decent percentage. All right, very good. All right, so nobody should be surprised, seeing these pictures anymore, because, after drones being used widely for the last 5 years, if I go to an agricultural meeting, a trade show, whatever, if someone still admits, I never seen those things before, what are they? I'm like, either you're not in the real production business or you may be living under a real big rock for a long time. Either one. So yeah, these are getting really, really popular globally, not just in the US, but also everywhere else in the world, pretty much all the major agriculture producing area. I just got back from Australia last Friday. Before I left, I visited their operator down there in Queensland for a few days. And before Australia, I was in Asia, visited a bunch of their operator and drone manufacturers in China. Also look at some of the operation in Thailand on tropical crops. The equipment are mostly similar now globally for what people use. The setup can vary radically, depends on what you spray and also the size of the field. You go to Asia, they don't need those big old rigs, like that one right there on the top. You probably don't even get that stuff to the field. They use like a minivan. Think about a minivan. They put your water tank, a charger, and the generator or whatever on the back of a minivan along with one drone. That's how they run their small operation. Over here, we have big fields, big old fields, open fields. You want as high efficiency as you can. And this is why folks figure out all kind of different design. Well, I'm not saying we don't have small fields. This is my new work truck. It's about a 3/4 ton last year, diesel. And then my students were like, we don't want to haul trailer anymore. They're more hassle than blessing. And then, they had dry rot issue, tire blown on highway several times. They said, we just want to put everything on the back of a pickup truck. And then that's it. This is getting popular as well, like the bed tender system. So you don't worry about hauling a trailer. Because Alabama and down in Southeast, the coastal states in general, we have lots of small, irregular shape fields, 5, 10 acre, 20 acre fields, right? So when you spray those small fields, that 60-gallon cone tank on the top, that's my mixing tank. That 60 or 80 gallon, I think they can put a maximum 80 gallon on it. Otherwise it would be too heavy. Those things will last you about 20 acres. So it's kind of perfect size for those guys to mix and spray small ones. So how you design your setup, it really depends on where you spray and what you spray. There is definitely no one-size-fit-all type of solution here. And the other thing is, this is a honest way to make money. So I know we have a lots of really honest drone dealer telling you, as long as you buy a drone from me, money's gonna rain from sky. You're gonna be so rich next year. It's gonna pay off everything in a month. You don't need to register your drone with FAA type of stuff. Anybody heard that before? You spray your own farm, your private applicator, you don't need nothing. All you need is buy a drone from me today. All right, so just be careful with that type of sales pitch. It is an honest way to make money. Look at all the guys basically staying outside in the summer. But don't matter how hot it is, they're staying summer all the time, working on this stuff. I got a friend in Illinois. The first year he started doing drone spraying, he said he lost about 20 pounds within a month and a half. But it was a pretty good exercise. I mean, I wish I could do that as well, right? But I just want to be honest, it is a physically challenging, especially the drones getting bigger, the batteries are getting bigger. Now we have literally 150 liter, 40-gallon drones, multi-rotors, and that thing weighs, 300 pounds by itself. Just by itself doesn't count the payload. The battery itself now weighs 40 pounds now. Think about swapping battery all day long, how much pressure you put on the back. So I do have concern for worker safety, for all kinds of reasons, not just spraying chemical drift on you, but also the physical challenge on your back and, or what if that battery fell and fall on your toe or that kind of stuff. All right, I guess I spent a little bit too much time going over these initial stuff. So there are too many things to talk about when it gets to drones. That's why we have a conference coming up next month at Kansas City, which is not too far away from here. That conference runs 4 days just talking about drones, all kinds of operations, setup, commercial setting, how you run your business, and also a research symposium. The first year we have a research symposium, which is interesting. So if you have interest, I'm going to have the information at the end of the presentation to let you know. So I'm going to focus on just 3 things. Precision application of herbicides, since this is still a presentation in the herbicide session, and also spray drift. Whatever you use to spray is going to drift, even a garden hose, right? As long as the wind blows strong enough, which happens all the time here, that's going to be a concern. The other thing that some of y'all need to know is called streaking or striping. Australians call it striping. We call it streaking. It's the same thing. Basically, you spray a field with the drones, come back, 10 days, 20 days later, that field looks like a zebra, with all the stripes. What happened there? Why it happened? So that has been the most common complaints from a lot of people. Crop duster, people flying those yellow planes, they really like to laugh at the drone operators whenever they made a field look like a zebra. And then we'll talk a little bit about pasture and non-crop usage. All right, so long story short, let's look at a bunch of field examples first. So this is about a 120-acre field in South Alabama. I've been to this field many times when I was still doing weed science work. I collect a lot of resistant pigweeds from this field. Because I drove around here all the time, I know on the south side of this field, close to the highway, there are more pigweeds than the rest of the fields. I've been there collecting sea hats before. All right, so when we first got the spray drone and have the mapping capacity, this was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And then I drew a box. This box was about 5 acres. So I mapped the field first. I mapped a field with a camera drone. I stitched all the images together and I drew a box here and the drone knows where to spray. So I put the prescription, basically this spray box in shapefile, get into the drone and have the drone spray it. So that's what we did. All right, you look inside this box, what do you see? What do you see? Weeds, right? Do you know what type of weeds that is? If I didn't tell you that's pigweed? Probably not. I flew the drone at 300 feet. I'm going after efficiency, all right? I'm running farming operation. I don't do, 10 by 20 feet a small plots and whatever. If I can map several hundred acres in an hour, this is never going to work for you guys. So efficiency is important. Now, when you fly high, you're very efficient, but you don't know what that stuff on the ground. But the only thing I know from the weed science perspective is anything grow in between those cotton should be dead, right? That's the goal. It don't matter what it is. You look outside a 5-acre box, looks a lot cleaner, right? So what do you guys think about this case? What I'm going to do here? Swap spraying, great. Because 80% of the field is fairly clean. Most of the weeds are just in that one spot. So this is not rocket science. It's fairly easy. And then I'm going to shame myself in front of the weed science community because many of the folks we know claim, oh, zero tolerance. We need to kill every single one of them. There's one there, there's one there, there's one there. I can see all of them. All right. But from the farming operation, especially from the ROI perspective, handle those little bitty or tiny bitty weed infestation outside the box will cost me 80% more in terms of operation. I'm spend 20% of money, kill 80% of the weeds, or I spend 100% of money, kill 100% of weeds. Which one would you choose? So that first 80%, you only need 20% of the cost to take care of it. So that's why we do spot spraying. It's probably not going to sell well in the weed science community, but for farming operation, I guess that makes more sense for the dollar. And then we were spraying glufosinate as a test, Liberty, just a straight Liberty with ammonium sulfate and the defoamer, which is called a strike force. That's from Nutrien. This was as little as a 2 GPA. All right, 2 GPA is not a lot of water per acre. Think about 1 acre, all right, 2 gallons, 2 milk jars of chemical. You spray that over 1 acre. That won't be too easy, right? Spray that stuff evenly, cover 1 acre won't be too easy. So that was only 2 gallons per acre. And also when you mix that much chemical within 2 milk jars, they're very concentrated. So foaming is a problem. Tank compatibility is a problem. Many of you guys still want to mix 4 or 5 different things in the tank, even though you're spraying that little amount. All right, think about how chemicals will like each other, in that tiny bitty space, right? Not too much. So some of y'all may have seen that. Those chemical can settle down to the bottom because it's so concentrated, and there is no agitation in the tank, in the drone. Not yet. Maybe we'll have that in the future. So that just aggravates the problem. There's all kind of reason. Liberty's issue at 2 GPA. Sorry, I didn't mean Dr. Galvin. The glufosinate concentration creates the issue here, which is foaming. All right, glyphosate will do that as well. But the result was very impressive. When we flew T30 don't fly very fast. You all know that. This was a hydraulic flat fan nozzle. We fried this pigweed golden and crispy from top to the bottom with only 2 gallons per acre. You look at this, right? All of you spray chemicals, pesticides. You have heard this for a million times since maybe your first job or maybe even before your first job. The more water you spray, the better, okay? We spray 15 gallons per acre using the TT nozzle, medium droplet size in a big old sunny day, using the exact same product at the same rate. The only difference is how we spray and the GPA. Did that work better? Nope. Why 2 gallons per acre was better than 15 in this case? Ever thought about it? I'm sure you guys have seen this. You spray that size of pigweed, almost my pocket high, between knee high to pocket high. It don't matter which nozzle you use. You burn the top off. You piss off the pigweed. You burn all the leaves off, right? The top is a bare stick, and you got all the leaves underneath. Can you kill that thing after that from the second shot? Most likely no, right? You just piss it off. Why, in this case, we see the difference like that? A lot of people ask me that question. I'm like, probably propeller downdraft. That'll be my best guess, because you can either use water as your carrier to get your chemical into the canopy and kill that weed, or in this case, I'm using air as a carrier. Ever heard about air blaster sprayer, air assisted sprayer? Same thing. I don't totally rely on the water. I'm relying on the airflow, the vortex, downdraft, propeller downdraft, whatever you call it. I'm using that as a carrier to blow the droplets in it. So it does It does work well, but also in our research, another thing we found is if you reduce the droplets number too low, which means if I'm spraying 1 gallon per acre and I don't create that many droplets to begin with, that's going to hurt this effect. So you still have to have sufficient droplet number to begin with, and then use the air to blow that thing deep into the canopy. If you don't start with enough droplets, it don't matter how strong the wind you are, you're going to run out of droplets about the middle of the canopy. Then we don't collect anything at the bottom. We have seen that on real thick soybean. So low volume application does work, but there is a bottom line that when you go too low, then they may or may not work anymore. Not for the content material. For your systematic, like 2,4-D, Roundup, and that kind of stuff, it may still be okay because you spray the top and they'll be killing the whole plant. And also this worked for foliar nutrients as well, And then looking at the another spot spraying example, this is corn at a very small stage. I basically mapped the whole field with a regular RGB camera, like your cell phone camera. And then I can still see those weeds in between the 10 inches tall corn in the middle. Those all need to be killed. So this is one talking point. You see John Deere See and Spray. You see that level of precision. They are going after each individual weeds. They can see tiny bitty weeds of that size just came up. That's great. But how much money you pay for the machine? Second, do you really need that level of precision all over the place? Because a lot of time these weeds grow in patches. I'm going after patches instead of individual plants, or weedy borders of your field or something like that, right? Or low-lying spotted ditches or something like that. So this is another workflow we tried. This is a peanut field. You can see the weeds sticking out of it. I mean, again, from the weed science perspective, this is a little too late, but we were just playing with the instrument, right? So I mapped the field. I selected those grids. Those grids are 20 feet by 20 feet that I want to spray. And we only sprayed about 35% of the whole field to capture most of the weeds. Before and after we spray, yes, you can see the weeds got hurt. And then this was another testing we did, still same workflow, map the whole field, select the weedy area, and the drones will still go on AB lines. They still go on AB lines, but the drone knows where to spray and where to shut off the spray system autonomously because you chose those grids. That's how you make the prescription. This is a general workflow, All right, if you look at the controller, and I do have a bunch of DJI drones. I don't know how long I'll be able to use them, but look at this number. This is a flow rate. That means then this number on the bottom, flow rate, that means if your spray system is spraying or not, right? And you can see the weedy patch is coming up in the middle of the screen, right? There's a patch of things sticking out, right? So that's your weedy patches. So I'm not flying. My fingers are not on the joysticks. See, it's spraying on those things right now, spraying on the weeds by itself. And then it gets to a clean part. The drone is on top of a clean part. See the number die down to 0. And then when it gets too close to the edge of the field, it picks back up again. That's kind of like how it does the precision spot spraying by itself. You see all the weeds coming up when it gets close to field edge, so it starts spraying again because field border is where you find most of the weeds initially in big fields. Okay. All right, just trying to demonstrate the workflow. In reality, how well does it work? This is successful to some extent. The issue is your flying speed, this number right here in foot per second or mile per hour, this number cannot be too fast because there's argument here. If you want to spray anything precisely, you can't go too fast. If you want to spray something precisely, you go slow, that's great. You get a great precision, but also you lose efficiency at the same time because you're going slower, right? This is why some of y'all may have seen that laser weeding machine in a big old vegetable farm in California. Those laser machines basically travel at 1 to 2 miles per hour for a reason, and also there is an upper limit for the See and Spray. When it's go over that limit, I forgot was that 12, 15 miles per hour. If you drive faster than that, See and Spray won't even work. It's just gonna turn itself into a broadcast machine because you're going too fast. It's the same thing here. You go too fast, it won't be very precise. You go slow, it will be precise, but you don't cover that many acres at the same time. I hope everybody gets that. This is still true for drones. All right, how did it work? All right, this was before we spot sprayed that field. You can see all the big old sickle pod and the coffee weed on top of the peanut. This is way too late in terms of application timing. So I put out that disclaimer first so the WSA folks won't hate me, for saying that. All right, this is way too late in terms of spraying, but we were just playing with workflow and chemical. It still killed most of the coffee weed right there. Coffee weed and sickle pod are both legumes. So I'm trying to kill legume weeds in a legume, which is pretty difficult. Coffee weed can be killed, but not your sickle pod. You see the sickle pod survive much better. Sometimes they just outrun peanuts because I feel like the herbicides likely will kill the peanut first before they kill the sickle pod. They have better tolerance. So this is another challenging thing. How do you identify these weedy patches when they're small, when they're little? They're not that easy to see from the sky, and you have to run your spot spraying before it's too late. So that does, create some challenges on your equipment and detection limit. This was Cobra or generic Cobra at the highest rate, I think, just because I'm getting close to the end of the application window because of the pre-harvest interval requirement. But it was hot. We also tried AIM, carfentrazone. AIM is hot on a lot of things, AIM is really good on morning glory. It is a late option for peanut. Maybe you can use that on soybean as well, but it's very damaging. Almost like spraying Gromoxone on top of peanut, And we have done spot spraying Gromoxone too, that hopefully we don't do that often. But Gromoxone desiccating soybean with the drones, oof, that works really, really good. I don't have a picture here. If y'all have interest in that, I can show you. We just finished that trial last month, or 2 months ago. Compared to the ground rig and airplane, it was great. Cotton defoliation with the drones, that's awesome. All right, spot spraying can also come with a different format. This is more like orchard setup. You can map the field and AI will recognize all these trees. You can tell those are fruit trees, all right? Don't matter if it's big or small. Those are little trees. Those one right there, they're maybe like 6 feet tall little trees. The drone will recognize all of these and you can customize your fly routes however you like. And the drone will spray each tree for you. This type of spot spraying workflow is getting more common, and it may be useful in pasture, rangeland, and row crop as well, See the drone recognize the tree and just do the rotary spraying on top of that small orange tree. This is very southern Alabama, right next to the Gulf Coast. They can grow oranges, and you can prescribe the drone spraying 0.5 gallon, 0.1 gallon, however much you want, over top of each tree. So that's another way to do spot spraying. So let's try to summarize a few things. Mapping is required before you do this. Otherwise, the drone don't know where to go. Precision level also depends on what type of signal you use. The typical GPS or GNSS signal won't be that accurate. You might need RTK for super accurate application. Fly speed is also important. We'll talk about fly speed, there, and also the relationship between the fly speed and propeller downdraft. Lower efficiency usually leads to high precision and vice versa. Rotary atomizer may not be the best one for spot spraying. I feel like hydraulic nozzle, the droplets go straight down to the ground is still better versus go out sideways and fall down like this. Many of the operators do manual flights to do spot spraying. For example, they just fly the drone looking at the camera, like FPV, first person view, like what those folks are doing in Ukraine. I'm sure you have seen the crazy kamikaze drones. It's basically the same operation, and they just fly the drone on top of the fence, rice levee, field border, ditches, something like that, and spray. I've done that before, which is fine, which works fine. And also newer drones may allow you to spray multiple field spots. This could be half an acre, 1 acre, multiple acres, or multiple spots in one flight. They finish one spot, they go to the next, they go to the next, So that is becoming a reality as well. All right, was the See & Spray Ultimate that we run the test on. All right, so this is a brand new See & Spray Ultimate. You can tell the tires are even clean. There's no dirt on it. So I was hoping I didn't mess up the machine because I don't have $800,000, to replace it. We ran some prescription testing on it. You can see the two booms right there. The top boom is your See & Spray boom. The bottom boom is a broadcast boom. I made a crazy prescription on top of cotton. You can see the bottom boom is spraying nonstop, like a broadcast. The top of the boom reads that prescription and the spray only where it needs to spray. It's like the top of the boom is running a spot spraying mission. This is without a See & Spray. That's basically reading my prescription right there. You see it's spraying with a part of the boom, the whole boom, not spraying, something like that. Or half of the boom. It's basically reflecting what I made over there for 3 different rates. Those different color represents different rates. So I was actually able to make the See & Spray Ultimate running a variable rate operation. Think about your cotton when you need a variable rate picks, something like that. Hopefully we'll be able to use our existing sprayer to do that one day, real variable rate application. This is an older John Deere tractor, only with exact apply. It's only PWM, right? It doesn't have a See & Spray. So it has one boom right there. And you can see those crazy pattern coming down, like playing a game, And you see when the pattern come down, the portion of the boom start to turn on, whatever. I made those crazy patterns based on the weed pressure of that field. You can see one long strip of weeds coming down on the right right there, on the right there. That's what it is. It's Hampshire. So this is a non-See & Spray boom or See & Spray sprayer. You can make it do See & Spray things, but there are trade-offs here. You do have to map the field and make a prescription. It won't be that accurate. You have to make that prescription or make that selected grid a little wider than the weeds. But yes, it's able to do it. So we played with that last year. Okay, I gotta hurry up. I know the coffee break is at 10. I still got more stuff to cover. Drift. No matter what you use, they all drift, if you don't spray properly. So drift is not really a drone issue, airplane issue, or ground rig issue. They all drift. Now, if you haven't seen how a drone drift, this is how a spray drone drift. You have seen it. It don't look any better or prettier than that. Somebody asked, what are you doing here? What's that color? I'm like, yeah, this is a baby shower, They also make a blue color. All right, so give you guys some new ideas to make money. Commercial drone operators, $500 each fly for a baby shower. Isn't that good? 10 minutes, you basically make that money. So this is a fluorescent dye. We use a tracer. This is very common. We can measure a dye down to 1 parts per billion once we collect it. So this is a tracer. All right, but it shows you how things drift downwind once the wind is blowing too strong. That's probably 15-mile-per-hour wind. You see the drone is kind of wobbling when it flies. That means the drone itself is struggling in that wind. All right. If the wind keep going stronger, you may crash your drone with a crosswind. Even the big old airplane, 747, you can't take off when the side wind goes too strong. Each aircraft has a maximum wind they can handle. So there's a limit. That's first message. You can't spray when the hurricane's on the way. And then droplets still holds true that the bigger droplets will land sooner. The smaller droplets can travel very far with the wind if it ever hits the ground because they can evaporate during the process. All right, looking at one example real quick. When we first have T40, I think this was a few years ago, we sprayed 2 5-acre blocks with Roundup and AIM as a burn down. This was a cover crop. Clover, rye, and a little bit reddish, stuff that Michael really likes for the, cultural weed control. All right, we're spraying a burn down material, try to kill the cover crop and the plant, right? So we spray both plots within about 10 minutes. It was windy that day, maybe that's not real windy in Oklahoma. It's just right around 10 miles per hour. You guys may think that's nothing, that's nothing. That's a big wind in Alabama, but nothing at all over here. All right. So we use the same drone, same chemical, same race to spray those 2 blocks. The only difference is the fly height. One plot was flown at 10 feet. The other plot was flown at 15 feet, 5 feet higher. All right. Because this is a flying thing. So you can change the fly height. That's a big variable. And also you look at the droplet setting. For rotoatomizer, you can change the droplet setting on the controller, just like a sliding box or sliding bar. You can do that. So the top one was a 300 micrometer as a setting. This block 2 was 200 micrometer in setting, 100 micrometer difference in droplet size. All right. So one is probably fine. The other one's like a medium droplet size, and a 5 feet difference in height. You can see one plot drifted much farther in the middle than the other plot. Neither one is high quality application because you can see the streaks. You can see the green streaks in the middle for both. All right. But one drifted more than the other. All right. We can run NDVI. We can map the field. And also in those stitch image, I can measure distance. Each position has a GPS points. For the plot, I flew 5 feet higher and also sprayed with 100 micrometer smaller droplets. The drift of herbicide, real drift, traveled 221 feet based on what I measured. This is a quick, dirty measurement. In that plot right there, I flew 5 feet lower. I sprayed with 100 micrometer bigger droplets, 300 micron versus 200 micrometer. The drift only traveled about 92 feet. So this is not rocket science. It kind of demonstrates 2 things that we need to focus on. Droplet size is still a big one to control drift, and also how high you fly it, right? The other thing I didn't show is the speed. Both plots were sprayed by the same speed, but if you are able to slow down, make sure your propeller downdraft, that the air beam push the droplets straight down quicker. That will also decrease the drift as well. But remember one thing, when you fly slowly, your swaths need to be narrower. When you fly faster, your swaths can be a little higher, but you better don't have much wind. All right. So if you have to fly in wind, make sure it's not crazy strong. Fly a little lower, fly a little slower, and use a narrower swath. I call those mitigation methods, and also adjuvants like a drift agent, so stuff like that. All these mitigation methods will help you to some extent. Don't feel like they make you bulletproof. They're not. You still can't spray in the middle of a hurricane. All right. So wind will prevail at the end. Wind will always win at the end. You can only fight against Mother Nature for so long. And then you lose your efficiency in this type of environment. So at some point, you just have to stop. Unfortunately. That's the thing with drift management. And then when you spray herbicides, there are something sensitive downwind. You always running that risk, right? If you damage a garden downwind, you damage a greenhouse, you damage whatever orchard, it's a lot of money to be paid. So it's better to wait for another time when the wind is not blowing to the sensitive crop. The other thing I want to mention, I covered this a little bit earlier in the talk. When you spray 2 gallons per acre on a field, it's only 2 milk jars you can get from the grocery store. It's not a lot of liquid to begin with. When you have a little bit of wind blowing either way, sideway, crossway, back and forth, no matter, they will make the droplets distribution even more unevenly. All right. You can see from this picture, all these petri dishes were put underneath the cotton canopy, sprayed by the same drone, spray in the same field. We got everything out. And look at the distribution of the droplets between the petri dishes, like this one right here versus this one right there, like 5-10 feet away. There's a huge difference. All right. So that's another thing I hope you guys keep in mind. For area application, even including plane, they don't spray as evenly as your ground rig. Your ground rig is the best because the nozzle is only 2 feet off the ground versus 10-15 feet out there. And then you spray way more water. So it's way more uniform than the drone. If you do some job require high uniformity, that's still your best bet. whichever method is more wind resistant, it's going to be a ground rig, all right, not a drone. Because the nozzle is just so high up there. You know, when you spray as high as the ceiling versus you spray as high as the table, there's a difference. It's not that hard to understand, right? Uniformity is not that great with area application. That's just a born deficiency. But does that mean you cannot do anything with the drones when it gets to spray contact material, herbicides, whatever? Not necessarily. I sprayed a field, a burn down, with 2 GPA. This is before and after. That's my truck right there. There's some power lines and utility posts. The drone just flew around the pole by itself. You know, now the drones are real smart. So you don't worry about hitting the wires, you know, whatever. Most of the time, if the wire's high enough, you can see it and go underneath. But you still need to be careful. Mark those as obstacle. But you see the efficacy comparison. Sometimes it does work at a very, very low volume. If you choose right chemical, spray on the right day, environmental conditions are great. But again, this is a game of percentage. How many days, how much time you have to allow you to achieve this type of efficacy. That percentage can be fairly low. So experienced operator know how to spray, when to spray, and what setting they use. All right. Same setting, same drone, same chemical, spray another field. The only difference is when we sprayed this field, there was very little wind. When we sprayed that field right there, 10, 12 mile per hour wind, some gusts can be 20 mile per hour. Look at beautiful green streaks we have seen in the field. The exact same thing being used on another field didn't work out. Why? Wind. I'm sorry. It's a little while here. I'm hoping everybody gets the point. You know, don't feel like you're bulletproof. Every day could be different. Your job in the morning could be drastically different than what you do in the afternoon, even though everything's the same. Okay, looking at some beautiful zebras. Remember the zebras I was talking about? All right, if I do have door prizes, say $100 check, no, sorry, $100 gift card or something, you know, if I'm gonna give away to you guys, just think like that. Which one is sprayed by the plane? Or which zebra is caused by plane or helicopter? Which zebra is caused by spray drones? Want to take a guess? I'm sure we have agronomists here sitting here. You might be looking at a picture like this next summer. Which one's caused by which? Left is plane? I mean, left is the picture of the left is taken by a plane. You can tell from the wind, right? But I'm saying who did that job right there. I'm talking about who took the picture. The left was a drone, right? This one was the airplane. There you go. You guys are smart. So next summer, if you see this, you know how it happened, right? The drone usually causes stuff like this. The stripes are not as straight. It's kind of warm, you know, or snake. Airplanes are much straighter because their travel speed much faster. We actually run a trial. We call it a strip trial. All right. Blue means dead strips. We spray cover crops. Red means very, very green. Very, very green. This is where we didn't spray, so they're very green. Red means green. Blue, purple means they're dead. We spray these strips with contact herbicides. Wind is blowing from south to north. You can see the very clear edges on the southern end, but it's a smear on the north end for that reason, because wind was blowing. That's what it creates the uniformity problem. And then you look at this kill strip right there. See that big old spot right here versus a tiny bitty thing here? Again, this goes back to the consistent point I was talking about. If you have to push yourself spraying the wind, you don't have mitigation methods, this is actually how your strip looks like, that one pass looks like. I just visualized this for you. So keep that in your mind. It won't be that uniform. So how do you mitigate this problem? First is cut off your operation when it's too windy. Second is put those two passes closer to each other instead of space them out. I spaced them out very far. You can see all this area I didn't kill in the middle. This is what I mean by reducing the swath, right? Make your passes closer to each other. That also protects you. But by doing that, you reduce your efficiency. Yes, sir. Great question. Now, why did I do this? This is definitely the stupid way to spray a field. I do many passes, many more passes, right? I should have sprayed north and south, up and down. And the wind is blowing from south to north. I get it. Because this is a research trial, we do crazy things, we have to show the effect of how the strips looks like, and also how wind blow from one side to the other affect the strip. So this is why we designed the trial to be this way. If this is a commercial field, a commercial job, I'm definitely flying up and down. I'm definitely flying north and south. But just to show the effect of how wind affects the distribution of the herbicides, I designed the field or the passes to be this way. Yes. Sorry, I forgot about the second part. If this is a real job, typically we prefer the wind to be crosswind at an angle or 90 degrees, but the wind cannot be too strong. It doesn't matter which direction the wind blows. If it's too strong, it's going to destroy your pattern anyway. The issue with the drone flying into the wind and along with the wind is the wind will decrease or affect the swath for the whole pass, and you won't be able to control it. And there may be some streaks created because of that, because flying into the wind is obviously more difficult than flying along with the wind, So if the wind goes sideways at an angle, at least everything fall downwind a little bit. So it's more controllable. Good question. All right, now you know the answer, which one is sprayed by the drone. See, what I did or what I saw in that research trial looks almost identical to the snakes here. All right. So that has been replicated in trials. That field was like 80 acres. When you do drone trials, you can forget about your 10 by 20 small plots, whatever. We spray big fields all the time, and they're way more difficult and more expensive to do. So a few things. Usually, talking point is, usually the requirement is 10 miles per hour. If you look at a pesticide label, if it shows you the cutoff line for wind speed, usually it's 10. All right, that doesn't always happen. So we do have smart people start spraying at night. This is another interesting hot talking point. We know EPA, US EPA regulates the pesticide. US FAA, Federal Aviation Agency, regulates the drone. FAA allow the operator to spray at night. Those exemptions have been given away for a while, for over a year now. So one government branch tells you can spray at night. The other government branch says on the label you can't spray at night. So how do you like that, right? Right now, we do have a bunch of operators spraying at night, and the drone pilots didn't start that. Crop dusters have been spraying at night for a while. They have been doing that for a while, like many years, right? So we do have to do more work on spraying at night. We know some of the herbicides don't work when you spray at night. Glufosinate, for example. Remember, glufosinate, shouldn't spray that too close to sunset. If you spray in the middle of dark, basically garbage. Bromoxone, any type of contact material burn herbicide, they will be affected. Even dicamba, Roundup to some extent. So what chemical can be sprayed at night? And also the temperature inversion, will that be a problem? Or maybe we should consider the intensity of temperature inversion. Say just 8 o'clock p.m., 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., maybe it's still okay. But after midnight, the temperature inversion is real strong. We shouldn't be spraying. I don't know. We need to do more work on that to change the label. Large droplets, more GPA, slower speed, narrow swaths. Those are your mitigation methods. Narrow swaths by itself can reduce a lot of streaking issue, right? That's general consensus. And then all these mitigation methods means lower efficiency, fewer acres you can cover per hour. So mitigation methods do come with trade-off. Eventually, wind will always win against all these mitigation methods. You just have to pack everything up and go back home, and wait for another day. Swath testing is also very important. You need to know how wide your machine can spray theoretically, and it won't be wider than that. Swath testing in a no wind or very little wind condition tells you the maximum capacity of the drone. But don't think that maximum capacity happens every day. All right, it's like, you can bench 150 kilograms, in a gym. But that's your maximum capacity. That's the best day you ever had. But it doesn't mean you can always bench that much every day, So things change, especially based on the environmental condition. All right, talking about pasture real quick. I guess I got 5 minutes left. People do use drones on crazy terrains. This is in the North Carolina mountains. You see the drone right there and the cows right here? He's spraying what type of chemical here over the cows, if you have to guess? Not fungicides. Could be insecticides, right? Most likely herbicides. This is why 60% of all the agrochemicals are herbicides. You see that little drones are flying on top of that terrain? You don't want to drive a ground rig on that. I can tell you that for sure. The drone is reading the terrain, is flying slowly. This is an older model. The newer model with better 4D terrain following, 4D radar, and with the LiDAR at the front. LiDAR is laser radar. It's using a different mechanism to read the obstacles. So newer drones with better radar and the LiDAR can travel much faster over these type of terrain and maintain the same height. All right. This may not be of big interest for you guys because it's so flat over here, but in case someone spray over the mountains, right? All right, looking at some example. This guy was spraying underneath the power lines for weed control. He got paid for this type of job. This was a crossbow, triclopyr and 2,4-D together before and after on some huge weeds. He has seen good results with drone at a 3 GPA. This job came from Ohio. This job came from Illinois. Vegetation management over this is a water dam or something, it looks like. Those are just big old rocks, all right? So this is a very difficult job for any ground sprayer with wheels to do. Think about those big old rocks, at the dam. But with the drones, it's perfect. It's imazapyr and glyphosate application. This works great as a example for vegetation management. I don't know how much water you guys have here, maybe not that much, but you go to other parts of the country, there are big lakes, and there are lots of grasses and weeds and algae growing in those recreational lakes and ponds that need to be cleaned. You see this XAG drone don't even have that rotary atomizer, like rotary nozzle. It's basically spraying the chemical straight into the water. You can see all the weeds underneath, right? Guess what that thing is spraying? What type of chemical? Herbicides. You don't need a fungicide to spray the pond. You don't need insecticide to spray a pond. You need a herbicides, right? So this is why herbicide gets used way more often. How does that work? This is a day of a treatment. Think about you going to a lake for a fun day and the water looks like this, real nasty. Do you want to get in? Probably not. That's why the park hired this guy to spray herbicides. And then 3 weeks later, it started to look a lot better and it needs more treatment, right? So that's how this works. These jobs can be way more lucrative than spraying fungicide on corn. Several-fold difference. So if you're looking for ways to make money, that's the way to go. And also the difference, the day of treatment and also 3 days after the treatment. So they do work. Solar panels. I know we have a mixed feeling about solar panels because we're all row crop people. We're seeing more and more of these on row crop fields, particularly close to big city. But sorry, we don't have a lot of say-so when it gets to new solar panels. Now, it does bring up some opportunity for folks to generate profit. Cleaning those solar panels is a newer job. They use a spray drone, high value. They even improvised a spray gun underneath to power wash the solar panel, because if they are covered by dust, their energy conversion efficiency decreased by 30%. They're not efficient to create, to generate electricity. So washing a solar panel is a job. And also, if it rains too much, it's warm, you're going to have a lot of weeds in between. Think about those perennial weeds get as tall as the solar panel. How are you going to generate electricity? Probably you don't get nothing from them. So weed control is a big thing in solar farms. They either mow in between the panel, but they're too close to each other. Mowing is difficult. Or they use a drone to spray herbicides to kill the weeds. So this is a newer job a lot of people start to get. One guy got a 4,000-acre job spraying solar panel, and you see the dead weeds in the middle is actually working really well. All right, what's the other creative way people been spraying? Now, when you spray a cemetery, probably you're not doing fungicide application, right? So this is a herbicide application. And also streaking can also happen in a pasture setting. If this is a soil herbicide, indaziflin being sprayed on this field, you can see the bad application led to the strip of ryegrass emerging the next spring over this Bermuda pasture. So soil herbicide can also cause streaking because of the weeds germinate on those zebra lines, the stripes that you didn't spray. All right. This is the last thing I'm going to show. So talking about the conference, these are the pictures took from the conference like 2 years ago. It's a very, very industry and commercial operator focus. We talk about regulation. All the drone manufacturers will be there. Pretty much 95% of them that make spray drones. Commercial operators will do a lot of talks. Some year we have demos, and lots of panel session. You can ask all the questions you want to. This is the conference information. If you want to get the domain, and the visit, it's going to happen at the end of next month. You can go in person. You guys are not that far away from Kansas City. So registration rate will increase at the end of the year. We also offer remote option. If you cannot go, you can join remotely on Zoom. You get all the recording and everything. You can watch the recording later. You can join live. You can live stream the event. All right. So it's about 4 days this year, 3-day conference plus 1-day research workshop. And thanks to all my grad students, they did all the horrible jobs. And my job is usually a pizza at lunch, So without them, none of the stuff you see would happen. No data, no nothing. And any questions, welcome to reach me through my email. And I will stay here a little bit longer to answer questions.